everyone, welcome to Civil Offense. My name is Ahmed Mlih, and today we are talking about democracy. And today I am joined by Ashton. How you doing, man?
Hello. I'm good, and fourth horseman of the apocalypse coming in.
Yeah, well, okay, so like you're the one after Kanye, because we had Trump, then DeSantis,
Yeah.
and now Kanye, and now you. Well, I
Yeah,
should say
of course.
yay.
I plan to be running for dog catcher of the United States 2024,
Well, not president.
get him off the streets. You know what? I probably shouldn't be making statements like that because someone's going to ask me who the dogs are, and I'm just going to say canines. But
Well, that was that was a little suspicious what you said there. But anyway,
yeah, but like,
so we're talking about
that's ever been used.
We're talking about Jonathan Casey's article, Why Democracy is Good for Liberty. But before that, as I was saying before, Kanye has obviously entered himself into the race. Ye has entered himself into the race in 2024. Though on Alex Jones' show on InfoWars, he was all like, Alex, you know how to get me sued by saying the things you say. So I don't know. But anyway, I have this article called The Fracturing of the Right, Ye, Trump, and DeSantis. And it talks about what the recent controversies and divisions of the right are a sign of. Just make sure to check that out. And also, I have a merch store, Z Big Dog Z, which, it's Civil Offense, but that is just the actual store link. But anyway, I have awesome shirts like this one right here. Flex it.
But like, why Z Big Dog Z?
Look,
though?
That's the name of the store.
Just because it's like memorable, you couldn't get Civil Offense.
Look, that's the name of the store. Anyway, so
you just like
look. That's what we have. We also have on there. Ask me about my ego shirt. It's our new shirt. Let's see it on an Asian lady. There we go. Now that's your Asian lady wearing our shirt. Okay.
Oh, I thought you meant just like someone Asian buy it and then send a picture. Dude. Okay.
Anyway, Why Democracy is Good for Liberty, apparently, by Jonathan Casey, who we talked about last time, and we'll probably have some choice words for today. We'll give him a good constructive criticism here. We won't, be too harsh, but obviously we will deconstruct his arguments here as he lays them out. But anyway, without further ado, Why Democracy is Good for Liberty by Jonathan Casey. There is a growing tendency amongst libertarians to attack the concept of democracy and blame it for America's problems. But this is reckless. We need to address the issues within our system and provide alternatives instead of burning the entire thing down. Democracy is defined as a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation, usually involving periodically held free elections. And, obviously that also entails the supreme right to take away rights of others. Supreme power to vote away rights. And obviously that means when you have democracy, it means your rights are up for debate and up for a vote.
Yeah.
So, but as he continues, many accuse democracy of being merely majority rule. But if democracy is majority rule, is the alternative minority rule? Well, whether we like it or not,
I think we could stop there because it's just like this is a key point, and this is like the worst part of our political discussion right now are the binary thinkers. People are like, well, it's either this option or it's this option, just completely ignorant and arrogant about there being no other solutions. But I'd say for our liberal friend who knows so much that isn't so and is also extremely arrogant, ignorant rather, the alternative being minority rule is somewhat understandable, but he knows just like vaguely of anarchism, doesn't know like any of the theory, doesn't know like any of the like actual things that anarchists say. But I would say that like if it wasn't a rhetorical question and if it was an honest inquiry, sure, cut him some slack. But it's just, dude, you're like on Learn Liberty. You should know of these ideas. You should know at least of the thinkers. But it's not a binary option. No slaves, no rulers. It's really not that much to ask. But
well, yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're saying you don't want majority rule, it's obviously you just want the minority to rule over everybody. So obviously, right now the Democrats are in power, but we really just want the Republicans to rule anyway.
Yeah, just the Republican Party. Mitch McConnell over there. just like snorting cocaine, being the little turtle that he is, and just want him rather than anyone else.
Well, whether we like it or not, some decisions have to be made at scale. We do not exist in a vacuum or a test tube, so we cannot bury our heads in the sand and say that that the alternative is no government at all. After all, few things are worse for liberty than power vacuums. So by that, he obviously means that the U.S. should leave all the troops abroad.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
see why that wouldn't track with his argument. Um, and
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. So like the power vacuums that we leave across the world and everything like that, like Libya. So like I'm guessing he is absolutely against the foreign wars of the United States. I'm not even saying that like rhetorically or anything like that. Because he does have, I think, a good take in here, and that's only because I'm not a David Friedmanite. But when it comes to just like the power vacuum thing, the power vacuums are created by state action or by weak democracies. Um, and I think we'll get into that later. But just the idea that the thing that we are advocating for is just a power vacuum of just being absolutely disarmed, no rights enforcement or protection or anything whatsoever, is very, I don't just want to say childish, but he's very new to these ideas when he shouldn't be.
well, as he says, how we define and protect property rights, resolve conflicts, and provide for a common defense are not decisions that can be left to the individual. There is simply no getting around the fact that how we define these things requires a baseline consensus from the people we live near, otherwise, a constant state of conflict would arise. If we left it up to every individual to decide what property did or did not belong to them, society would soon devolve into might making right. And that obviously tracks with the argument that I defend my property with a gun. I defend my property
Yeah.
with, the community, if I so please, or whatever rights enforcement agency I decide to take on. But also, what is his solution to might making right when it comes to the global scale? Because he's saying here that essentially that if it's left up to individuals, well, then it's going to be, screwed over. So if governments have almost this anarchist relationship with each other, then how is that resolved without some sort of international enforcement agency, or is it like a state, a government that is even bigger than the ones now and is even more centralized? Otherwise, you would have might making right when it comes to Russia invading Ukraine, I suppose.
Or the U.S. Engaging in its foreign wars. Um, when it comes to that like global stage thing, that's a good thing to say because we don't have a like one world like super government. The UN isn't that. It's just like, hey, we're gonna send you a letter because you're committing genocide. Um, Strongly worded one at that, and we're gonna send in peacekeepers that are gonna rape some kids too. Like just some abuses. Um, but you don't have that, so they're in an anarchist relationship between one another. There aren't like rulers of governments over governments unless you're talking about the regional powers, but that's not on the global scale. But then he like speaks about how we define property rights can't be left to the individual, and the great thing is that it's not. If you ask any, well, I wouldn't say any, but most like anarcho-capitalists adhere to the non-aggression principle, and the consistent form of adherence to non-aggression principle would be natural law, called Rothbardian natural law, to distinguish it from like Thomas Aquinas and whatnot. But that is an objective framework of ethics that defines what is criminal and not criminal, and it's like every other right, like defines all rights as property rights, as exercise of ownership over your property or ownership over yourself. So the denial of Rothbardian natural law is essentially the denial of self-ownership or the denial of ownership.
Well, have you considered that it just can't be left up to the individuals, though?
It just can't be left up to the
I mean,
individuals, but
yeah,
I'd say it's a good thing
that's
that
a.
it's not.
I mean, is that not the most compelling argument you've heard?
It's not like it's left up to the individuals as it is in our creation of arbitrary law or anything like that. But it's just like these individuals are just like, in places of power. but
Well,
then also the resolution of conflicts, arbitration agencies, and the provision of common defense, security agencies, and rights enforcement agencies.
well, what if we left it up to a consensus of the most people possible? Because, according to Casey, majority rule has a much better track record than minority rule. So if our choice is between majority and minority rule, he's setting up a dichotomy there, then all we have to do is look into the history of the real world. There will be, or there we will find clear proof that limited rule by majority has far better consequences for individual liberty and prosperity than rule by minority. From post-revolution America to post-World War II Western Europe to post-Soviet Eastern Europe, democracy in many forms has consistently been the best choice for liberty.
I'll let you go on before
I was wondering if by post-revolution America he meant, Articles of Confederation, or if he meant the Constitution, because
probably Constitution.
Yeah, he probably means the Constitution, but post-revolution America is Articles of Confederation. That's the true independence that they sought. But it really, he says limited rule by majority, but like what limits that really, and you say, okay, the Constitution, well, what has that done? We can go into that again for like the millionth time to say, what has that done to limit the power of the government? What has that done? How has the majority been limited? How has it been ultimately secured that rights are not taken away? I mean, you could literally look to right now, again, the example of the gun control bill that passed in Congress, or you can look at other gun control legislation that passes, and it's like, okay, well, the majority clearly at least has the power to pass red flag laws. I mean, the majority clearly at least has the power to ban bump stocks. If you look at the instance of Trump, though, I don't know, there were some court cases going on with that, whatever. Nevertheless, I mean, it seems like, if you just go into the encroachment of rights, at least slowly, the majority has the ability to do that. What's your limited rule for that instance to stop it from happening slowly as opposed to all at once? Because it seems like in his mind, it's like, oh, well, it's not all just happening overnight with one election, so obviously it's limited. Well, but again, like it's happening.
Yeah. And I've just got like a bunch of questions to fire off, like what's our tax rate compared to revolution? What's the police state compared to pre-revolution? What's the size of our standing army compared to pre-revolution? What more do I have here? But just like all of that, just like how large our federal code is, just like the civilian casualties of our military actions, because we talk about like what's happening in the United States, but our foreign involvement and our foreign wars are absolutely ridiculous. And just talking about the United States, what's our prison population like per capita in the United States? We still have enlistment on the federal code, like forced enlistment, everything like that. We do forced conscription. So it's absolute just utter hogwash, I would say. But then you have the idea of it isn't that weak monarchies necessarily often lead to, weak governments of any sort often lead to the next sort of like stage of it. But like weak monarchies usually lead to weak democracies, and then weak democracies usually lead to weak dictatorships. This can happen through like revolution, or it can happen through just like giving up power or anything like that. But say just like the Weimar Republic. That was democratic, didn't really lead to liberty. It was pretty weak and got taken over by a dictator. And I'd say that might be the path that America and other democracies are headed down.
But without democracy, who would bring us the Federal Reserve?
Oh no, we can't control the currency. No, he's not for the Federal Reserve. I'm pretty sure.
Well, I'm not saying that he's for it, but I mean, that's what happens when you elect a president like Woodrow Wilson, and then the bankers are able to come to him and collude and say, well, this is what we want. And Congress goes, okay, well, we'll give you this act to essentially establish the bank that you guys want. So and those were selected by the majority. They were elected in that manner. So it comes down to the same idea of how Rothbard talks about the word we, when it comes to the government, and basically saying that if you believe that a government's truly representative, you're saying that it's as if the government's taking actions on behalf of the people, and those actions are essentially committed by the people, if your logic truly tracks. So again, it's like, okay, the people put in the Federal Reserve. Okay, the people decided to destroy the American dollar. What's your solution to that?
More democracy, of
Well,
course. We just
obviously.
need more democracy at all
Now,
times.
but nevertheless, okay, democracy isn't perfect. It is human. Without checks and balances on government power and transparent elections, a democracy can theoretically be as brutal as any other form of government, except that in practice, this simply doesn't hold true. All other forms of government eventually end up catering to a minority. Democracies alone have proved resilient in protecting individual liberties. The real world results of the pure democracy that we are so often warned about, such as several cantons in Switzerland, are among the freest places on earth. Well,
Except in practice, this simply doesn't hold true. It's just like if you have a plant or a derivative of a plant that a bureaucrat or politician says should be illegal. I mean, it's just like it doesn't hold true. They do not. They're not brutal. They don't throw you in a cage for several years. That just doesn't happen. Or just like if you want to exercise your self-ownership of or ownership of your property in a way they don't like, that doesn't happen as well. Just like the mere possession of like a piece of property definitely doesn't get you thrown in jail or anything like that when you don't have the government's permission. But and then just like the idea that they end up catering to a minority, all other forms or just all forms, because it's not like lobbyists exist or anything. It's not like anyone's just like captains of industry or whatever in the ears of politicians to get them to regulate the market in their favor, or it's just not like there are moneyed interests at all times for every single part of government regulation. No, it's just like every other form, that just like democracy doesn't have that problem.
it continues to come back to the argument that, well, look, as bad as it is, we're not going to get any better. That's, it seems like that's what, advocates of democracy tend to fall back on whenever it's criticized. It's like, well, I mean, what do you want? Something worse? Like, they just go straight to it. It's like, oh, you obviously must not want something better. And
do you know about the cantons thing? I don't know of it. Cantons in Switzerland.
Yeah, okay, so administrative divisions of the Swiss Confederation. Why didn't he just say 10,000 Liechtensteins?
Yeah, it's either localism or federalism. If it's federalism, it's less based, and it's probably that. But that's just like the state system that we have now. Like the United States is divided up into states. I mean, that's better. It's not best because it should be localism rather than federalism. But it's just like, yeah, when you have less, like, when your democratic institutions are smaller, they're less bad. It's almost like the more democracy you have, the worse that it is. And the less democracy you have and the more local your decisions make, the less people like the less bad parts of democracy come out. Like the worst parts of democracy don't come out when you just have an individual absolutely removed from society and from the other individuals of society saying, "Oh, I'm just getting money and I'm putting in money." And there's nothing wrong with that, ignoring that he's stealing or like complicit with the theft of other people's money and whatnot.
Well, look, he's making another case here. We're gonna have to hear him out again,
Okay.
even though so far,
Let's hear him out.
even though so far he hasn't really given us the whole like how risks are mitigated. Now he's telling us the risks posed by democracy can be mitigated. Okay, well, are you gonna explain it? Thank you. The beautiful thing about representative government is that the risks it poses to liberty can be mitigated by restraining it within a system of a constitutional republic. After all, democracy refers to people holding power indirectly through a system of representation. Indirect representation, along with checks and balances, has the best track record of any form of government for protecting individual liberty. Okay, well, so far he's just kind of still introducing it. Like it's not really giving us the whole like how it's mitigated. There's like there's another blog, I suppose. But wait a minute, no, that is the national divorce is that's if I look at the little link at the bottom, it's national divorce. He just goes back to that article. We already destroyed that, so there, you can check that out. It's already out.
Had our commentary.
But he talks about a constitutional republic as if that is somehow wildly different than a representative democracy or one that is unrestrained, I should say. He says like, okay, well, obviously the Constitution is the thing that's going to save us after all. It seems like he's getting back to that same exact idea that we've already talked about before. He says, we are dealing with the real world, so we must look at how humans respond to different forms of government. In the real world, democracy has an incredible ability to increase peace between nations and within them. Anyone who is trying to sell you a perfect system in a human world is trying to pull the wool over your eyes. So
increase peace.
Yeah.
Increase peace.
It obviously
in the
has, right?
real world. So sure, we'll just ignore Vietnam, Afghanistan, U.S. like CIA and MI6 involvement in Iran, the support for the Iraq invasion into Iran, later war with Iraq, dual containment of Iraq and Iran, war with Iraq some more, funding of the Mujahideen, Afghanistan, Iraq again, Somalia, drone bombings in Pakistan, Libya, Syria, Iraq again, our support for the Saudi genocide of the Yemeni people, and that's only talking about the U.S. war on terror. Let's just not get involved with the CIA plots of replacing dictators and socialists across South America and the containment of communism and everything like that.
Well, think about it. It could have been worse. You know, the U.S. could have been something other than a democracy, and that all, you know, it could have been worse than that. It could have been even worse.
Always worser.
So
always worser than democracy.
This is his solution. We must adapt to the imperfect nature of people. Democracies may have fallen into some modern traps, growth of the state, increased taxation, and restricting movement, but they have also proven resilient at avoiding historical traps of government. Free speech and personal liberty have never been better protected. And so, Snowden, Julian Assange.
We could go off on that, but I'd like to point out he sees the growth of the state, increased taxation as a trap, and not as the nature of the state that it is. When the state has this, like, the state as monopoly wants to expand horizontally and vertically, so it wants to expand over the markets that it is in increasingly, and it wants to expand over other markets. So when you have the state have just like the like the monopoly on like regulation of the economy, it's going to expand in like the regulation of the currency. It's going to expand that regulation of the economy. So now we have insane, arbitrary, and extremely long tax codes detailing exactly what ways you do not own their property, but what ways they get to dictate your ownership to you. But if you want to go off on like the personal liberty thing, I
feel like I've already went into it. It just keeps going over and over again on the same thing. It's a consistent like, okay, well, it's better than all other government. It's better at protecting your liberty. Yeah, it's gotten worse, but it's still better than other things. It's just the same thing over and over. What is he trying to do with this? Because it just seems like you're not trying to make a compelling case to the people that are already in the sphere of like rejecting democracy. It seems more like either the people that are on the fence about it or those that already believe democracy is such a great thing that you're trying to keep within this bubble of saying, well, it's the best form of government possible. Keep believing that. It's just it's really just a repetition of it. It's more so like, you know, just a gospel here that he's providing.
And like let's remember, he's writing this in September 2022. So it's just like he came through the COVID pandemic. He came through like witnessing, say, just like even in the United States, just like the way that we locked down everything like that, closed businesses. Sure, that didn't happen on the national level. It happened on the state level mostly. But those are also forms of democracies, and other democracies exist in the world other than the United States as well, such as Australia and New Zealand, which were draconian, had COVID lockdowns, COVID camps, everything like that. But just even in the United States, just like how are we doing? How are we doing for personal liberty? What things can you not do? And if that list is, I'll just throw it out. If you can list just like 10 non-aggressive things that you cannot do, not doing too well. But there's hundreds, there's thousands of non-aggressive things that you cannot do in the United States.
Well, look, as worldwide incomes have skyrocketed, okay, thanks in large part to the freedoms protected by democracy, the willingness to have a higher tax burden has increased as well. As more and more people rise above the poverty line, the burden that taxation imposes grows smaller, even as the tax rate themselves go higher. This isn't to minimize the negative impacts that taxation causes, but the tax burden should only be, or should not be the only metric that we use, that we measure freedom by. Would you move to North Korea if you knew you would never have to pay a tax again? Of course not. So, and he literally goes for the argument that at least we're not North Korea. It's we've been saying this the whole time, and then he goes straight for it. Oh my.
Yeah. It's because, like, one thing, just like thanking democracy for protecting freedom, when I'd say it's largely in spite of democracy that we still have the freedom that we do today, and that's mostly due to like the people who actively try to keep the Constitution like as meaningful, because it is important to say that the Constitution is not absolutely worthless. It is still unfit as a document. Bless up, Spooner. Rest in peace. Peace be upon him. But the Constitution gives legitimacy to the government. So when they are still utilizing it to give themselves legitimacy, and they're the true ideologues that come in every now and then who hold liberty as a value, that is important to the extent that it still leaves options. It still leaves options. Like, other countries are not as fortunate as having the opportunity for localism because their entire system is top down. Many nations in the EU do not have this ability, Switzerland being an exception, I guess. But that is a key point too, where it's just like, it wouldn't be by democracy, it would be on that limiting factor of democracy, because if democracy had its way, if we were just like able to rewrite the Constitution today, we would have much less liberty. And then the willingness for the higher tax burden thing. Willingness makes it sound like it's voluntary. If we made the taxes voluntary, what rate do you think people would be paying? What rate do you think people would be willing to pay if we made these services like have the taxes tied to them and those services be voluntary? Absolutely not nothing. Not nothing, but extremely minimal. But when it comes to that, of course, taxation isn't voluntary. Taxation is involuntary. Of course, you have to pay your taxes. That's to the constants in life, taxes and death. But it's just a matter of people are complicit with it. People get their wealth from not democracy, but the free market and like free interactions between individuals competing, cooperating to achieve their ends. But that isn't that doesn't make it consensual. That doesn't make it voluntary. That just means, okay, fine, you could take this and I won't raise too much of a stink about it.
Okay, so there's this liberal idea of the consent of the governed, and that's how the government is established and that's how it stays in place. And that idea is the one that ties into this when he starts saying things like, like when you say it sounds voluntary, when he says that basically this is what people consent to, this is how, like, this is a representative government, this is a representative democracy. Again, it really just goes back to that whole idea of, oh, well, even despite the tyrannical actions of the state, despite any sort of actions of the state that people don't consent to, actually, people consent to the state. It's inherent consent. There's a social contract, and it just
even against like expressed lack of consent, expressed disconsent, or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you just consent because you live here. You live here, of course, so thus you should follow every single law because you consent.
Right, and what is Congress's approval rating? Like 7%. So you're telling me these major institutions have like probably 7 to 10% of Americans, maybe in some instances 20, but that's like that's the highest around. And you're telling me that this is representative anyway? That still destroys your argument, nevertheless, as if this is some sort of consent going on here, as opposed to some voting in self-defense, if you want to go to that idea, or the people just seeing their representative as somewhat better than the rest of Congress, but nevertheless not consenting or not approving of Congress in general.
Yeah.
But anyway,
here.
While inflation has often seduced many democracies, it is not a result of democracy, but a result of human nature desiring to create value from nothing. Many historical forms of government regularly devalue their currency with base metals. The solution isn't to change which kind of government has a monopoly on currency. The solution is to end government's monopoly on currency entirely. But
I'd say here on his solution. I'd say that's fair. I mean, there's one point too. It's just like, sure, it's human nature to desire to create value from nothing, but how do they do it? They do it through the halls of the state, through that monopoly on currency. But when you have that decision up to a democratic votes, as we do, you have politicians who get in charge, who are self-interested, and they respond to the incentives of the people to want to spend. Am I allowed to swear? How much am I allowed to swear? who want to spend a fuck ton, just like keep spending, like raise that fucking bill, and of course they don't want to pay taxes because they want to take, and they don't want to give when it's somebody else's money. If it's their own money, they're more fiscally responsible with it, some more than others. But they have to have this power, and like it is just again, whenever you say like something shouldn't be left up to the government, something shouldn't be left up to democracy, you're saying it shouldn't be left up to democracy. That is an indictment of it. When you say like the government shouldn't have control over this thing, that is an indictment of democracy. And like, what, you wouldn't leave this up to a democratic vote? You wouldn't leave like your consent over your body up to a democratic vote? Well, that's a good thing. Those are good instincts. You aren't consistent with them.
Yeah, well, it's a limited control of the majority. So, I mean, obviously, his barriers are where we draw the line for where the majority can govern. Because if he doesn't want the government to have a control over the money, then the government shouldn't have a control over the money, and the majority shouldn't be able to vote that in. If he wants, well, we'll talk about immigration in a second. Let's say his result is that he wants open borders. Well, no, the majority shouldn't have apparently an ability to talk about that either. So, but it's all for him. It seems like, okay, you're the one setting the boundaries. You're the one setting where you want things to end with what the majority can control. Okay, what if there are people who don't want the majority controlling anything? Why is your opinion more valuable in that respect than theirs? It doesn't make sense as to, what sort of consensus you're basing this on when it's just your opinion.
Well, if they don't want the majority controlling anything, they can vote. They can be if they're the majority, then it'll happen.
Yeah. Okay.
Just work within the system. Always vote Libertarian or Republican. Just like never.
That's the thing too.
Anything.
He talks about on Twitter, like basically even running as a Republican if you're a Libertarian is incorrect because it supports the duopoly. And I saw him talking about this, like in response. There was this whole like thread about the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire and all that, and he was saying, no, it's like you guys are betraying the Libertarian Party by supporting like Republican candidates that are even like the Free Staters and all that because you're supporting the duopoly. And it's like, okay, well, at that point, you're not in the majority, first of all, I guess. It depends on the issue, I suppose. But you're also just going against yourself, basically, by saying, like, oh, we're somehow going to get the majority by informing enough people to vote Libertarian, and then at that point, we get the majority to put in Libertarian policy. And it's like, okay, technically it's consistent with your stances here, but it's just a losing argument. You're just going to lose.
It's just like a absolute, like, I don't know if it raises to a level of cognitive dissonance, but he's like, we have to recognize reality as it is, guys. We have to be in the real world, no utopian ideas. We can't use these certain methods because we can't use the Republican Party to take power, but we have to stay within the system. So we have to vote third party and then win absolutely nothing, even on the local level, unless you spend a ton of money. So it's just like, his prescriptions do not line up with reality, but he's always just like, we gotta be aligned with reality, guys. Also, Jonathan Casey, if you're watching this, I mean, we'd love to have you on.
Yeah, we'll have you on, Jonathan Casey. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Bring your arguments.
We're clowning you a little bit, but
yeah,
respect for at least putting your ideas out there.
So he continues, as the physical barriers to immigration have fallen, legal barriers on immigration have increased. This is not a direct result of democratic actions, but a byproduct of democratic nations economically outpacing non-democratic nations. I guess, okay.
Also, just like Gibbs, like having, like, just like say, free public education, K-12. Everything like that. If you have a child that is born to an immigrant here, they go into that system even if that like immigrant is not legal, and this goes into like more so like just mostly talking points of like the not even just like the specific welfare services like food stamps or whatever, those aren't available to immigrants, but there are still many services that classify as welfare of the United States government, and local governments and state governments, of just so many gives of just like giving free shit to immigrants that come here rather than just providing for themselves and like entering into the free market and everything like that.
I will say, he says a byproduct of democratic nations, economically outpacing
Yeah,
non-democratic nations. His take here is that to be democratic is to be, in favor of
free market.
free markets
It's the
and
neoliberal world
capitalism,
order.
right? And I know David Bose, vice president of the Cato Institute, was talking about this before, and he was saying, democracy and capitalism and all that are things that we have to value, and the far left and the far right are trying to take that away from us, and we have to protect this liberty oriented center. Like, it's
It's like it's the IQ distribution on a bell curve. You got the socialists at the bottom who are just like democracy is antithetical to free markets. And then you got like the people on like the midwits in the center. It's just like no democracy and capitalism. And then it's just like you got like the high IQs where it's just like democracy is antithetical to capitalism.
well, Ashton, have you ever considered for the I don't know. Maybe you have. I don't even know. Like, I don't know you that well. But there are no serious alternatives that would better serve liberty. So, I
Of
mean, I
course.
just don't know. But those trying to push buttons by opposing democracy, and I wonder who that is, also never play out the obvious scenario of taking away people's ability to vote. How do they imagine the process of de-democratizing going? What is far more likely to take advantage of removing the ability to vote? Libertarians or authoritarians? The answer is obvious, and it's obvious in history. Taking away the ability to vote will never fail to lead to tyranny. And with that, I see
I'm
why he says that, but like it's because he just has this view that, oh, well, obviously, as soon as you touch the right to vote, it's going to become authoritarian because these leaders are going to have their minority rule, and it's like blah blah blah. It's a very like small scope of what could potentially happen,
right.
and it's just
But uh I'd like to answer his question honestly. How do they imagine the process of de-democratizing going? And there are a few ways of implementation of more liberty-oriented ideas on how this happens. So it would happen on the local scale as like quite simply because anything on the larger scale is getting to absolutely ridiculous levels and trying to obtain and maintain power. So this is purely on the regulation and taxation of property. On no other subject, on every other subject, it can be whatever. Um, First of all, welfare recipients aren't allowed to vote on those sorts of things because that's exactly how they get their welfare. And this includes people like police officers, teachers, anybody who's employed by the state and receiving welfare in that respect, because they have that conflict of interest in raising their own income. The voting power is in proportion to the property owned. So if you have a property that's worth $100,000, the vote over regulation of all property is less proportionate to the dude who has $1 million in property. And once again, I'd like to remind everyone that corporations don't vote. We're not expanding voting just based off of like property owned because the state would be the biggest voter. Um, the Those who vote currently are the residents of that locality. But then, because of this property regulations and taxation will trend towards extinction. In the funding crisis, the liquidation of public property and public services should occur. Um, and this should be in accordance with lifetime taxes paid. And now, all public services, all public property is privately owned, and you won't have this problem of uh, regulation of individual liberty. And regulation is definitely a light word, and I'd say more so absolute infringement of individual liberty. But now they're like no more, and then virtually nothing is left to vote on because these public services, this public property, is no longer within the purview of the state and has now become private, and no, and it is the And even he recognizes no private individual has the right to tell another private individual how to live his life. But of course, the state should have that power. But
Actually,
that is laid out in
I have a question for him because, basically, like he's saying, the process of de-democratizing. So, if he's saying that, does he mean all forms of de-democratizing are bad? Like, if for example, there's a state that had mail-in voting for COVID, because the government was like, oh, we have to shut down and all that, and you can't go in person, and now says, well, maybe we don't need that anymore. So wait, that's a bad thing. Wait, like ballot harvesting is a bad thing, or undoing it is a bad thing. And just in general, any sort of repealing of laws that, for example, were put in place because the government said, oh, we're going to shut down the polling places for COVID and we're going to limit it and all that. You're saying that essentially because these are greater in their scope of how democratic they are, the mail-in voting and all that, that they ought to stay in place. Like these factors that are implementing universal suffrage that overwhelmingly benefits the state and obviously Democrats, but it benefits democracy, as you put it. And
Republicans just haven't caught up yet. Once they catch up, it'll benefit them.
I don't know, but nevertheless, it's gonna benefit the state either way.
But we just have to phrase this as a check on democracy. That's how we get them behind, because
Right.
it's just another check and balance on democracy. It's not de-democratizing. We just want to limit the vote as like a check on democracy, because then he'd be for it. But yeah, the using democracy defensively is definitely like the way towards implementation of liberty, and it's a check and balance on democracy. Of course, rather than it's not de-democratizing. Not at all.
Well, in Jonathan Casey's view, it is. Probably. I don't know.
No, we just need to reframe it, of
Oh,
course.
well, obviously. Right. A check on...
'Cause,
right.
Being honest, any check on democracy is an undemocratic institution by necessity.
Yeah.
So just the reframing and rephrasal of it, of course, makes that difference. No? But...
Well, anyway. Let's see. All right. Those who support minority rule do so by imagining a ruler in their own image. They theorize, without historical or practical evidence, that such a ruler could exist and not fall prey to the same shortcomings they find in democracy. They ignore that anyone willing to seize power from a democratic system will never be a friend to liberty. They imagine a government of angels, not men. So, with that, he's just kind of going into the whole, mold bug argument at that point. If he's talking about going into a the Carlyle getting a monarch in, absolute monarch, and having power that will institute a liberal world order or nation, if anything, that essentially brings about libertarianism almost. But it's really not now he's switching up who he's talking about, because he's not really talking about anarchists anymore. He's not saying I guess he is saying those who support minority rule, but he's just switching back and forth between talking about the anarchists and the neo-reactionaries,
because it's not serious. Now he's on the neo-reactionaries and monarchists.
Yeah,
because the anarchists, of course, it's a power vacuum and that'll be filled. So he just views it as the same end point.
Yeah, I guess so. He says in 1850, less than 6% of the world's population lived in a democracy. Today, that number is around 62%. I think that's the same one Biden pulled out. I think he was like, oh, there's less democracy today. Less. Think about it, man. But anyway, this growth has taken place not because democracy is a fad, but because it helps people solve problems and improves their way of life. We are dealing with an extremely new and raw mechanism of corporate decision-making. Wait, but okay, no, he's saying the growth that has taken place is not because democracy is a fad, though it really comes from the degradation of the state. That's why democracy has come about to the extent that it has now, and I just don't think he's going to review that as an argument. But to him, it's just this is the natural evolution. This is where humanity goes. This is how we evolve and process and become better people.
We're reaching the end of history, of course.
Oh, yeah. Once we get 100% democracy, that's it. History ends. History is good forever. We have a libertarian, classical liberal world order, and literally, and
we just need to tell people about these ideas, guys.
Yeah, no, and then
we
history
just need to convince
ends.
the majority.
It stops. But for such a relatively new form of government, its track record is truly remarkable. Democracy, stability, and peaceful transitions of power are rare traits in historical forms of governments. We should not change what works imperfectly for that which doesn't work at all. Those who would claim that libertarians are anti-democracy are simply tipping their hand. They care more about fantasy notions of liberty than real-world liberty. The more we sit around pining for utopia, the more we will fail to act for liberty in the world around us. And no system of government in the real world provides for more security for our freedoms than democracy within the confines of a constitutional republic. And there's the catch: within the confines of a constitutional republic. Like, yeah, I don't know.
We're failing to act for liberty in the real world around us, guys.
Yeah,
just don't do any of these other methods.
Advocating for freedom is failing to act in the world around us. To act in the world around you, you have to vote Libertarian, but not the ones that are in the Mises Caucus, only the ones that are in the classical liberal caucus, and make sure that they take the reins of government and just bring about this new world order in which we all just leave each other alone, except for when it comes to police or courts or roads or so on, whatever pet project he probably has as a minarchist. And so
I don't even know. He's not even a minarchist. It's not like he's in the minarchist caucus. He's in the classical.
Yeah.
Liberal.
Whatever, but whatever have you, these terms are interchangeable, honestly, because what does minarchy really mean? Anyway, at the end of the day, the ability to vote is not what can restrict liberty, it's what the vote controls. And it's our job to use that ability to vote to protect liberty. And he's just going on the same idea. So that's the article from Jonathan Casey about how democracy is good for liberty. Closing thoughts, Ashton.
We just need checks and balance, like common sense reforms, checks and balances on democracy, and that would include the use of democracy defensively to restrict democracy, of course. And this restriction of democracy should end in the privatization of the commons, and the end of regulation of self-ownership and infringement of self-ownership. So basically, just the end of slavery. We're just like abolitionists, you know. Yeah, not a big ask, of course. And if you want more of these ideas, I guess we could probably talk about it. But there are many places to go. Rothbard, Mises, Hoppe. Learn about those guys.
With that, I feel like I've already said everything I could say. And I will say this, just going on like national divorce, for example, which he also refers to back in this article. If your case against national divorce, for example, is something like it's illegal, you're beyond helping, okay? And if your case for democracy is good for liberty, is that the constitutional republic is somehow so much different than any other democracy, and it's going to limit the government, and the Constitution has somehow limited the government over time. Again, it's just the same thing. There's no helping you. Maybe if you listen to this video, you can be helped, and maybe if you go buy a shirt,
you just have to listen.
If you go buy a shirt,
specifically,
and if you flex it, wait, hold on. If you flex it, I needed to give him a little shot. But I had a good pump pick yesterday. Okay, but if you do all that, and if you go to Civil Offense, sign up for my Substack, and subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment, all that, you can be saved. Salvation is yours. Now, without further ado,
we're a cult now.
I think that this can only be wrapped up by saying that Civil Offense is the key to winning. Thank you.